Today's scripture reading is Matthew 6, 1 through 4, 16 to 24. Giving to the needy. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in you and in secret, will reward you. Fasting. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father sees what is done in secret and will reward you. Treasures in heaven. Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and desire the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Hello. If you don't know me, I'm Sabrina Stern. I am the treasurer here, so I get asked to speak for Stewardship Sunday. I was here a few weeks ago with my entire family, and I jokingly asked Linda for a copy of the kids' activity sheet. She ran with it, and all 8 adults and 3 adolescents ended up doing the word searches and crosswords for that lesson. So in lieu of table talk or discussion questions, because we don't want to get into financial questions in a group setting, I decided to return the favor to all of you. There's a word search on the back of the bulletin related to one of the other big stewardship Bible verses that you can do while you listen. If you are curious what these words have to do with the Bible story, you can read Matthew 25, 14 to 30 and try to guess what we would be talking about if that was our reading for today, but it isn't. Our reading comes from early in the book of Matthew, where Jesus has begun to teach, gain followers, and gather crowds of people to hear him speak. He goes up on a mountainside, sits down, and begins to teach. He speaks on many topics. The Sermon on the Mount stretches from Matthew 5 to Matthew 7, but we are going to focus on Matthew 6 since it pertains to gifts and stewardship. If you are wondering why we've skipped a section of Matthew 6, it's because that's the reading where Jesus teaches those gathered the Lord's Prayer, and many of you will not remember, but I already did speak on that in 2020. The first thing Jesus teaches us in Matthew 6 is to not be boastful in our giving. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Essentially, keep your generosity a secret from everyone, even those as close to you as your left hand. I am a huge theater fan, and when I go through the program at a theater performance and see all the donors that are listed as anonymous, I think of this passage. I will acknowledge that sometimes acknowledgement is nice. Human nature is to want to be acknowledged for accomplishments, so I mean no shade if you have ever been listed by name as a donor for anything. The important part here is that if you desire to be acknowledged publicly, if that is your main motivation, then you have already received your reward. But if you do it secretly, God will see what you do and reward you. What I think that they are getting at here is what I think is the basis for why it is important to give. If the reason why you are generous is so that you can get your name in a theater program or on the side of a building or have a party thrown to thank you, then your generosity will only extend as far as those rewards. You will never give more than PBS or NPR or whatever organization requires in order to get a tote bag, a license plate frame, whatever the swag is that you want, in order to show that you are a supporter. You are supporting so that other people will see you as a supporter and maybe think a certain way about you. See that you belong to the club of people who are generous to that cause, maybe think more highly of you. You are not giving because you value the work of NPR or PBS or whatever else, and know that all nonprofit corporations, including churches, cannot exist without donations and need every dollar in a world where everything is increasingly expensive. To give in that way allows for the mere existence of the charity you value to be its own reward. One way of giving the acknowledgement is the license plate frame and the feeling of superiority. And the other, it's the continuation of the work of the organization that is the reward, along with the good feeling of helping, the knowledge that you did all you could to keep the organization existing, and of course, as Jesus says, a reward in heaven. The next part of this verse is talking about the same concept, but with fasting. Don't make a show of your suffering so that people know that you are observant. Hide your hunger and suffering so it is not obvious. This passage reminds me of Mark Wahlberg going to a television interview on Ash Wednesday a few years ago with his ash cross fully visible. Getting anointed with ashes on Ash Wednesday is certainly nothing to be ashamed of. But the reason to observe Ash Wednesday is to remember that you are dust and to dust you will return, to reckon with your mortality and the temporariness of this life and the vastness of what comes after. I'm pretty sure Mark Wahlberg could have had that same spiritual experience and still have wiped his cross off before he went on national TV. What he was doing was about the promotion of his movie with religious overtones and trying to telegraph to the Christians in the viewing audience that he is just like them, and so they should see his movie. His reward was viewers for his movie, which did make a profit. His reward was not a deeper understanding of his faith and a conversation with God and a reckoning with the crucifixion and the resurrection. I will not speculate on the status of the heavenly reward Jesus mentions for Mark Wahlberg. All of this is to say, being an observant Christian is great, but make sure you are doing it for God and for your deeply held beliefs, and not so that other people can see you as an observant Christian. The last part of this passage, again, is making the same point as the previous two. It is basically giving us the old adage, you can't take it with you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I will add to the adage, you can't take it with you regarding material wealth, the equally common adage, money doesn't buy happiness. If you are focused on making sure that people see you as an observant Christian, a good person, a generous individual, once again, that your name is in a program or on a building, that everyone knows you are generous, do you think that when you get those rewards that will give you lasting happiness? I don't. I think that leads to you wanting to have more money, more acknowledgement. You will always be chasing the next dopamine rush received externally through acknowledgement, and that will lead to deprioritizing family, hobbies, spirituality, a connection with God, whatever it is that actually makes you happy. Instead, store up treasures in heaven. What are these treasures in heaven? Performing good and generous and loving works for their own sake and not for status, gratitude, and acknowledgement. To tie this back to stewardship and to this church specifically, the reason to give to your church isn't so that you can get your name on a building. Indeed, the things that were named after people here were not necessarily named after the most generous givers. It is those who dedicated their lives to the service of this church. The rose garden on the patio is in memory of Al Douglas. Rooms in the education buildings were at one point named after Anna England and Susie Alball. Each was a passionate volunteer and leader in this church, and each did not receive the reward of recognition of having something named after them until after they had passed. If they were here today to ask, why did you give so much of yourself to the church? I don't think that they would say it was for any sort of recognition. It would be because they love this church, its mission, and wanted to see it survive and thrive. They believed in its values and mission, knew they could help, and did the thing, even though they weren't paid or rewarded for doing it. So in a world, in a community where funds are tight and you only have so many dollars that you can give to any charity, why pick First Church of the Brethren, where there is no program to get your name in, We give our branded gifts to anyone, regardless of their level of giving or indeed any giving at all. And there's no real social cachet to get by being the biggest donor here because you want this place to continue. Did you know that the denomination of the Church of the Brethren is one of only 3 historic peace churches? It's us, Mennonites, and the Quakers or Friends. Our belief in pacifism here is important and rare. Our work with the Friends Center is vital. When that building was constructed, it was because without it, the local chapter of the Quakers, another historic peace church, couldn't afford a place to worship, and the Peace Resource Center and the American Friends Service Committee were struggling to find office space that they could afford or even places that would host them. Because this church was invested in the mission of peace, we and our 3 like-minded partner groups built that building at great expense and controversy and lots of things. There's like a book on the history of building that building. And now we can do the work of promoting peace, not because it brings us recognition, because it doesn't, but because it's the right thing to do. Beyond that, we are a community that loves and cares for each other. I am so impressed to both see people here who were here when I was a child and people who have become members and leaders very recently. I am so pleased to see this community embrace all comers. And once you are here, this community will support you the best it can. Our prayer list and the way that it includes friends and family members of members and regular attenders and their friends and family members and neighbors and coworkers, reaching out to a whole network of people who we all care deeply for, whether we've met them or not, is an example of the way our faith community reaches outside of itself to be loving and caring. This is also worth preserving and continuing. As I said in my stewardship letter, I was the delegate to annual conference this year. The way annual conference works is to have delegates from different churches sit at tables together to discuss controversial topics prior to them coming up to discussion on the floor or prior to vote. This is an effort, I think, to have people who see those with differing opinions as humans, individuals, and fellow Christians living their faith as they interpret it, rather than as the enemy. You end up getting to know your table mates pretty well. When I introduced myself as belonging to First Church of the Brethren of San Diego, one of the other members of my table asked if it was true that we had taken a vote to be an open and affirming congregation without any preparation and passed it. I love this story. It was during an interim period where my grandfather, Irvin Stern, was interim pastor here. He had been the pastor of this congregation in the 70s and 80s, and then he moved on. At one point, he had Russ Matson's job as the district executive of the Pacific Southwest District. He had watched churches in this very district go to war with each other, inside and externally, over the issue of human sexuality. It is common that before a church affirms a stance on whether they will be open and affirming to members of the LGBTQIA+ community, they hold classes on what the Bible says on these issues and how to reconcile the so-called clobber verses with this acceptance. John Davis, who I so wish was here today, who is board chair at this time, wanted this church to officially vote to be an open and affirming congregation so that we could call a pastor who was going to live into that affirmation, so that this church's stance was established before the next pastor was called. My grandfather said, okay, and started lining out all the steps we would need to take prior to a vote: discernment, education, etc. John said, no, I think we can just vote. Irvin was deeply worried, but he needn't have been. We took the vote, and as I remember it, it was a non-event. A few questions of clarification, and then an overwhelming yes vote. In my memory, it was unanimous, but I'm not sure if that's like maybe rose-colored glasses put over it. But if not, it was very close to unanimous. This kind of overwhelming support for an affirmation of human love, and humans to love who they love and be who they are without couching it in terms of like love the sinner, hate the sin, or any such thing as that, is rare and beautiful. It's worth saving. It's worth giving to. I am so proud that's what this congregation is known for. Our reputation is one of acceptance and love. I always cry. Don't worry. The other thing people came up to me and asked about is the 4 individuals from this congregation exploring calls to ministry. As I sat at that table in that conference center in Grand Rapids, I sat with members of churches from across the country, and they all spoke to the same problems we have of increased costs and smaller attendance on Sunday. But over and over, I heard that most of them had no members in their congregation below the age of 60, and indeed several of them no one below the age of 80. Now, we love our 60-year-old and up members. Indeed, if you don't have retired members in a church, it can be very hard to have programming since you need volunteers with time to get anything done. And I love, love, love all of you over 60-year-olds. Please don't think that that's the point I'm making. But that's not our reality. Like, if you look at our congregation right now, you see children, adolescents, working age adults, and we have people willing to step up and say, I am willing to be a part of the next generation of the Church of the Brethren. This is rare. This is wonderful. It's worth preserving. All of this is to say this church is alive and vital and worth giving to. I would also greatly encourage you to consider stretching your giving a little. I am so aware of how expensive everything is right now and how wages just haven't kept up. But I am also aware of the fact that we are barely making ends meet and are about to make a transfer from our reserves to be able to pay our bills through the end of the year. I know that it may seem inconceivable to give more than you already have, but I am asking. You don't have to change your pledge cards since we already collected them. I am just saying that when you write your weekly or monthly check, add on an extra $5, $10, $20, whatever you can. If you have automatic giving set up from your bank, thank you. But maybe see if you have any cash on you on a Sunday morning to throw in the basket. If you have a good time at an event for the church, maybe the Friday night peace venue, maybe pull up PayPal and send us a little something extra in gratitude for our programming. This may seem like it won't make a difference, but it can. Little differences add up. When one person claps, it doesn't make much noise. But when a room full of people join their claps together, it makes thunderous applause. Your small extra contributions together with others can add up to make a difference in our budget. One last point I want to make is this church is celebrating its 60th anniversary of being at this space, but it's been around for much longer. It is amazing to think that the seeds planted way back then have allowed us to be here today. The symbol of stewardship in almost all the materials that you find out there is almost always a tree. It's a tree because the metaphor they're trying to make is that tithing is the roots that allow church programs to go. Picture a graphic that has roots down below with things that say like tithes, offering, volunteers, etc. And then the trunk will be something like the physical plant and the maintenance of that. And then the branches will be whatever programs any given church finds important: Christian education, feeding the homeless, etc. The point being that support comes from the donations. This is true, but I want us to think of a different tree metaphor for stewardship. When you plant a seed that will become a tree, it is an act of faith. You know it will be years before you get fruit or shade from that tree. Depending on the type of tree, you may not live to see it reach its full growth. You plant a tree not to see the results anytime soon, but as a pledge, a promise, a hope for the future. That's what the members of First Church of the Brethren of San Diego did all those years ago. They set a hope for the future and planted a seed, hoping it would continue to grow for generations. The world has changed so much since this church was planted, but I would like to believe that those people that did the planting would be proud of what grew. Please view your tithes and offerings as planting seeds you may not see grow. Of course, your offerings will go towards keeping the lights on, paying salaries, planning outreach events, things that you will experience, but they are also about putting the love of God into the hearts of those who will come up next and become leaders of this vital place. So as we move on towards the end of service, I would invite you to, after we're done, to partake in our dessert fundraiser. And as you pass by, we have branded merch that you get regardless of your giving level, as I said. We have our 2025 First Church of the Brethren branded calendars, not so that you can show off your support to this church to other people and they can ooh and ah over your generosity, but so that you can look at it every day and remember your commitment to this church, both financial and otherwise. And as you look at the beautiful nature pictures that are taken by Cheryl Old, I want you to think about the seeds that were planted in each of these and how they grew into all this splendor. And think about the seeds that you're planting now at this place and what they might grow into. Amen.